Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be covering the newest album from the Devin Townsend Project called Transcendence. So if I'm being very honest with myself, I haven't really covered as much metal in 2016 as I was hoping to. And really, it's just a case of getting overloaded. I've had a busy year, both in my full-time job and my personal life. And through all of that, on average, I'm putting out more videos than ever and I'm still falling behind. Although, yeah, I'll admit there were a couple cases where I dug into metal albums to review them and I just didn't have enough unique material to make a full or informed case. Think back to the Cobalt album or the Vector album. Well, throughout late September and October, there have been a lot of metal albums that have been on my anticipated list all year. It's about damn time I finally dig in. Don't worry, I'll be covering lots of other genres too, but it's about time for some long overdue catching up. So let's start off with an act that I've consistently liked for years now, the Devin Townsend Project. Ever since the titular frontman split off the group from projects under just his own name, they've delivered a fair few albums of high concept music that isn't afraid to push genre to its absolute limit, while still delivering insightful, eccentric, and yet insanely catchy music. Now, the last time I covered Devin Townsend was back in 2014, where I reviewed 3 of his projects. The sequel to his landmark Ziltoid the Omniscient, Z-Squared Dark Matters, the country ambient crossover masterpiece Casualties of Cool, which still holds up to this day, and Z-Squared Sky Blue, the last of which I'd argue is a real hidden gem. The song Silent Majority made my year-end list of my favorite songs of 2014, but in retrospect, the entire album could have had a real shot at my top albums of that year. It's grown on me that much. And as such, outside of my overloaded schedule, I had no real excuse not to dig into the newest Devin Townsend Project album, Transcendence, where if you looked at the liner notes, seemed to be bringing together a richer cast than I had expected. Anneke van Giersbergen was of course on board, but so was Shay Amy Dorval from Casualties of Cool. Awesome! And for the first time since the era of strapping young lad, Devin Townsend brought in another producer. Now this would be Adam Nolly Getgood of the band Periphery, another act that I may have passed over earlier this year, mostly because I didn't want to have the gent conversation. But with that possibility that said sounds might be creeping into Devin Townsend's production, which might fly in contrast to his more melodic compositional style, okay, we're getting off topic. How's Transcendence? Well, it's fine. I wish I liked it a lot more. And considering Devin Townsend has admitted the project may have run its course and nearly completely dry, well, I believe it off this album. Of course, it's not a bad album. I'm too much of a fan of the soaring vibe and huge presence that Devin Townsend can evoke to dislike this, but it's definitely a very thin listen. Without the hooks that anchored Sky Blue, the surging climaxes that anchored the better Devin Townsend Project albums, or even the smooth ambience that I'll admit wasn't really my thing on an album like Ghost. But definitely, it had an audience. This, I don't know if it's a dilution of the sound or just a lack of ideas on a compositional level, but I'd hesitate to call this more than just good at best, and believe me, that's really disappointing. And here's the exasperating thing. On the surface, this album is operating with a lot of the same materials that made previous Devin Townsend Project albums work. The guitars gleam and shine to drive the melodic grooves, the drum work has only gotten more complex and yet still feels perfectly balanced, the trumpets and keys add more melodic accents, and the entire mix has this shimmering, misty quality that you would expect for a record called Transcendence. Even the gent additions, which came through in some chunkier riffs and a couple solos that can venture off measure and actually sound pretty good, they tend to work more often than they don't. Hell, this is even an album where Devin Townsend adds in enough acoustic guitar to along the verses to play in contrast with the titanic swell of the choruses to accentuate that sunny vibe. All this should work for me, and yet on a compositional, on a melodic level, the tightness that made previous Devin Townsend projects in this mold work is nearly completely gone. Maybe the addition of more metal collaborators persuaded Devin Townsend to shift away from the relentless focus towards immediately memorable hooks, and if that's the case, that was a mistake, because nearly all these songs, they run long and you get the impression that they all could have been chopped down significantly to intensify that impact. This is also not helped by the tempos, which tend to be a little bit too slow to drive the more stately grooves into the fast-paced momentum that's made songs like Fallout, Universal Flame, and Silent Militia so kick-ass. The record is more ponderous almost by design, but here's the issue. If you don't switch it up to build to more dramatic crescendos or keep a solid foundational hook to pull everything back together, compositions can really meander, and man, is that the case here. And sure, I get that Devin Townsend is comfortable with letting the cover of Ween's Transdermal Celebration meander and ambience for the entire second half of the borderline 10-minute song, but it feels indulgent, inflating a song that was never designed to be of that size and then just leaving it bloated and overdone, and frankly, that's a little disappointing. Now, a more subtle problem is that without these change-ups and recognizable hooks, Transcendence can start to feel a little bit one-dimensional, not having the texture or variety beneath the blinding sheen of the production to really stick with you. And a component to this problem are the vocals. Now, I originally touted bringing on both Anneke van Giersbergen and Shea Amy Dorval onto this album as a real strength, but outside of Offer Your Light, by far the best song in terms of tighter composition and hooks, they really feel like glorified backing singers, occasionally audible in the vast haze before Townsend's overdubbed and multi-track vocals just drown everything else out. Now look, I get having symphonic presence, but come on! You have one of the most distinctive female vocals in metal, and a singer that proved with Casualties of Cold as an absolute revelation, and you don't give them a hook? Or a chance to harmonize more? Or any sort of three-part vocal interplay? For as much glorious excess as this album embraces while still trying to have its sensitive side, the lack of more complex vocal arrangements is completely baffling to me beyond just the choral arrangements, and it really strikes me as wasted potential. I mean, come on, Devin Townsend, you have all this talent, make use of it! And if you want to know that last area where that indulgence really is most prevalent, it comes in the lyrics and themes. Now, reportedly, Devin Townsend wanted to write a more positive album in light of a pretty generally miserable 2016 for everyone, to push past lost loves, internal crises and fears, and transcend all of it to something pure and simple and loving, and turns out he did exactly that, with the sort of broadly sketched, mostly abstract, but sincere writing that's always characterized his work. And yeah, the simplicity of Devin Townsend's language is a strength on this album, especially on tracks like Stars and From the Heart and Higher, but this is where the problems in the composition of the instrumentation really comes to bite this album hard. As I said, nearly all these tracks run long, and yet with few exceptions, the biggest being the musings and battle between logic and emotion on Secret Sciences, which works pretty well, but nearly all these songs are underwritten. This is an album that is desperately in need of a little bit more poetry, if not more elaborate, but can simply cover more minutes of the song. And no, I'm not counting about the overdubbed choral vocals, which, while being pretty and contributing to the atmosphere, tend to lose some of their unique bombast when the songs overuse them. And yet, even with that, there's a part of me that's a little let down by the writing all the same. I get that Casualties of Cool is a far more subtle project, and that the sequel to Ziltoid might have been overwritten in spots, but Devin Townsend's got the potential to be more subtle and more interesting writer than this. And yet, all across this project, I get the feeling that he's just stretching to the absolute limit. So to summarize, I think that Devin Townsend had a point when he said this would probably be the last Devin Townsend project album, because even on this project, it feels pretty thin. Now don't get me wrong, I like the bombast and style of this sort of album, but underwritten compositions and underwhelming hooks are a real issue, especially as this album is straining to sound so much bigger to transcend, and yet without more contrast, all that sheen and sparkle can lose some of the dramatic pathos. And when you're dealing with such a high concept, you need that dramatic pathos. In other words, I'm giving this a very strong 6 out of 10 and a recommendation, but this is far from Devin Townsend's best. If you haven't heard Sky Blue, or Addicted, or Deconstruction, or especially Casualties of Cool yet, I'd go for all of them over this. And if you're a diehard fan, well, like me, you're probably gonna like this album mostly, but you also know by this point that he has done better. But with this sort of ending comes a lot of fresh possibilities, and with Devin Townsend, I can't wait to see where he goes next. So, yeah. This end might be an ending, but I'm okay with it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here. Again, this sort of album I expect will have a pretty die-hard fan base, but I also know that Devin Townsend fans tend to be fairly analytical when it comes to appreciating his music, so I can imagine some of you guys might have some contentious opinions here, but I got the poll there so you guys can all tell me what you thought. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.